before I introduce my guest, which you would like to hear from, because the responsibility was given about a year ago, is crucial to transforming the economic fortune of Nigeria. I'm talking about things that has to do with taxation. But let's tell you what happened at NEC yesterday. For those of you who may not have followed, the president gave some approvals. They call it the National Construction and Household Support Program. And there were a couple of objectives. So if I can get my first slide, almost a trillion naira has been approved for this particular phase to cushion the effect of this. So that's the objective of this National Construction and Household Support Program, to boost agriculture, manufacturing, construction, and provide urgent economic relief. If we go to the next one and break it down a little bit more as to what the federal government is planning to do for states and household in terms of support. I say that 50,000 naira grant will be given to 100,000 families for 3 months. That maybe comes to about 15 billion. And 155 billion naira for assorted foods. Well, that's not quite clear. They will break it down maybe later on in their breakdown. And then 10 billion naira for CNG buses in 36 states and the FCT. So if you accumulate it, that's about 360 billion. And the provision of labor unions and civil provision for labor unions and civil society organization. That's a bit vague. We're not very clear on what that means. That's not all that this intervention is supposed to handle. There is also the infrastructure element of it, which is my next slide. Rail and road infrastructure priority. So you see there, Sokoto Badagry, my slide is high, Badagry Highway, Lagos Calabar Coastal Highway, Trans-Saharan Highway, Port Harcourt Maiduguri Railway, Lagos Kaduna Standard Gauge Railway. So these are some of the interventions or some of the priorities of the government on the approvals they've given to ensure that to stimulate the economy as much as possible. So I just needed to bring you up to speed as to what happened at NEC yesterday. But all of this happened, but there was no word of minimum wage because it's a very contentious issue. But I've been joining the program this evening to talk to us about some of the reforms he's been working on and how far they've gone by the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform, Mr. Oyedele, joins us via Zoom. Mr. Oyedele, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
I would like to start with what both the states and the federal government and everyone else has kept mum over despite all of the approvals. The minimum wage. Maybe your quick take before we go to the core issue of taxation. What do you see playing out from what you're seeing in terms of the process of negotiation? Labour is saying the governor's trying to change a bit of the narrative to allow them negotiate based on their capacity is not going to work.
Yeah, thank you. I think every Nigerian has a take on minimum wage. So clearly, I'm not going to be speaking for the government, whether it's the federal or the state government, but just my personal view on the whole minimum wage issue. First and foremost, I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize that workers need to be paid a decent wage for them to be able to work well and live well. But we also have to take into account that there are so many moving parts and very many stakeholders, including small businesses. Even if we stay within the government itself, based on the revenues for 2023, about half of that year you already had, the additional revenue from subsidy removal and naira flotation, but altogether the revenues were, under 15 trillion naira. That's, FAC plus IGR, even including local government. So if you estimate the number of workers in Nigeria to be about 3 million, that's federal plus sub-national, and you just calculate the revenue per civil servant, it comes to about 5 million naira a year, which is about 415,000 thereabout per month. So in other words, if we decide to use all the revenue that government earns just to pay civil servants and do nothing else, you'll be talking about average of 420,000. And bear in mind that this is the average, so which means we're not even talking about the minimum wage. So you're going to be asking yourself, we need to take into account the capacity to pay. And my view is that we need to use this opportunity of minimum wage negotiation to have a rethink about our minimum wage structure. First and foremost, I do think it should be calculated based on per hour. And we need to relax some of the rules around civil service about what you can do. You should not just be limited to farming. You should be able to do more than one job, provided there's no conflict and you can give your minimum hours to the government. There's also need to be a conversation around measurable productivity. Imagine, for instance, if we're able to measure the productivity of individual civil servants on the average, or even the revenue as well, and we have a requirement that says government shall not pay you minimum wage that is less than a certain percentage of the productivity that you had. What that would do for all of us is civil servants will then start focusing on productivity because it drives their minimum wage. And otherwise, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much you pay, even if it's 1 million naira per month. If it's not supported by productivity and output, give it about 2 months and the 1 million will look exactly like 30,000 naira today.
So at the core of this is the issue of revenue, as you've highlighted. The previous administration also mentioned the issue of revenue, which your committee comes in here, because the whole idea of the reform is to see how much money we can get in the long run by optimization. So how much work have been done so far, and how far-reaching are we supposed to see these reforms take place? Because you've done a lot of work. We've been seeing your work, but we're waiting to see either implementation and how it will affect all of us in terms of its impact.
Yes, you're right. We've done a lot of work, quite extensive, and it's far-reaching and transformative. We had a very good meeting with the governors a couple of days ago as part of our consultation. Before then, we've met with them previously on that net. We've also met the commissioners, the head of internal revenue services at the federal level, state. We've met, private sector stakeholders. The work we are doing, unfortunately, when it comes to fiscal reform, it cannot be as quick, like, for example, monetary policies, because you need to make sure that your policies are driven by evidence and that you consult widely. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good your intentions are. If you don't get the prescriptions or the diagnosis right, as you say, then your prescriptions will be wrong, and then you'll not be able to heal the ailment. So we are now at a stage where we are moving from ideation to implementation. Some of our recommendations have been implemented. In fact, we have a new withholding tax regime that is meant to provide a lot of relief to particularly small businesses, and also to provide relief for even large businesses in terms of their working capital, so they can have more finances freed up for growth, given the rates of interest that we are dealing with now. So that has been signed by the Honorable Minister for Finance and the Coordinating Minister for the Economy, because by law, we didn't need to take that to the National Assembly. So that is going through the process of gazetting, which will happen in the next few days or couple of weeks. We also have, draft legislations that are currently going through the final approvals. And then after that, by the Q3 that we're getting into now, it should go to the National Assembly. We do have a draft new national fiscal policy as well. So there's a lot that we're just getting to the stages now where, as we begin to implement, the Nigerian people will start to see the impact in a very positive way.
Is there a way, I know we have a revenue problem, given what you've done so far, is there a way to raise or generate more revenue without raising taxes that will not hurt the economy? Because we're going to come to the issue of some of those taxes.
Yes, certainly. The whole idea is that we have done, whatever we have been now for decades, and it hasn't produced the right results. We have over 60 different taxes and levies, but we are barely even collecting enough money to fix roads. By the way, the entire budget, that's the federal government of about 29 trillion, plus all the states in Nigeria about 15 trillion. If you add it up, comes to about 44 trillion, and that's around $30 billion. That $30 billion is even less than the budget of Kenya, which is around $32 billion. Is barely a quarter of South Africa's budget at $130 billion. And of course, it's even less than the budget of New York City, not even just New York State. So clearly, Nigeria is a poor country with the potential to be a wealthy country. So we do believe, based on the analysis we have done and the data available to us, that the right way to go is not to introduce more taxes. And in fact, if you're going to raise the rate of any tax, it has to be something that we're doing as a result of the consolidation and harmonization. We do think that having fewer taxes are broad-based, easy to collect, and do not place burden on the bottom of the ladder of society is the way to go. And by using data, intelligence, and technology, we can close the tax gap so that people who have not been paying before begin to pay, who have been identified as people that should be paying. And the poor people should be legitimately exempted, particularly nano, micro businesses and low-income earners. And then we think that with all those, we can easily more than double our revenue within a period of 2 to 3 years. So we are confident about the revenue mobilization capacity of the work we're doing over the medium to long term.
So let's situate this properly so that there'll be greater context and reference for the general audience. I think I read somewhere where, permit me to say, you were lamenting over the issue of the number of taxes people in sachet water, what we call pure water business pay. Maybe you would like to share that for us, because that kind of gives us an idea what Nigerians are dealing with.
Yeah, so sadly, the system we have today is trying to tax everything and everybody. If it moves, tax it. If it moves again, tax it even more. Seems to be the approach we have today. You would imagine those who are selling sachet water, that we call pure water, how much possibly can be your capital plus profit. With all the hard work, people are just trying to see if they can find 800 naira, 1,000 naira a day to take care of themselves and their families. That will cover their transport and feeding. But when we're speaking to market traders associations, they said to us, these guys are paying about 6 to 7 different levies every single day, and they give them in form of stickers. That clearly is not acceptable. We've also seen truckers who are moving produce, including food, from one state to another, having to pay more than 450,000 naira in one single trip. Sometimes the stickers add up to more than 50. So at the end of the day, this is the reason why, for example, if you look at the last inflation numbers, even just between rural area and urban area, the difference in inflation is about 500 basis points. That's about 5%, which you can only just explain by way of transportation. But by the time you add the taxes to it, you see that it is one of the reasons why that differential is so significant. So we think that the approach to adopt is to exempt some of these vulnerable people, including sachet pure water. We also believe that we should stop asking people how much they earn so we can tax them. We should first support them to be able to grow and create wealth, and then use intelligence to tell them how much they have earned. And so that way we are sure that evasion and people who try to live above the law will be a thing of the past. That's how every decent society that we aspire to be like have been able to develop their economics.
When we look at the macroeconomic indicators, food inflation, for instance, between when the president came into now, it's about 15%. If you look at headline, it's about 11%. And then if we now look at the interest rate, maybe about 600 basis points. And so things are getting tighter and tighter. In the work you have done with your committee and all of you in that committee, what are the bottlenecks you're seeing within the system that you may want to share, that we may have to look at and maybe think differently so that all of the effort that's been put in is not gone to waste? Because I am sure that there are certain elements, perhaps, that may not want certain things to work if you're not careful at the end of the day, because for every failed system, somebody's profiting.
Yeah, that is right. I think, and that is the case in almost everywhere in the world, that there are people who want to benefit from, the mystery and the chaos of any system. So it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that that's not, something that is allowed, sustained for a long period of time. But if we move a little bit away from that and look at the issues that we're dealing with, so the inflation, for example, a lot of it is structural. And like many of us have said, including me personally, I do believe that inflation is largely cost push, not demand pull, and that the liquidity that we have in the system is concentrated in the hand of less than 2% of the population. And these members of society are just looking for returns. They're not the ones trying to buy bread and yam and gari and raising prices up. But when it comes to the structural aspects of the challenges that we face, some of it is the inflation is that the exchange rate pass through because we are, largely import dependent, even for input equipment and also for food. You also have the insecurity that you have in some parts of the country, making it difficult for farmers to do what they have to do. You have the part of this structural problem that is to do with regulation, or maybe I should call it over-regulation, where we are adding a lot of, cost delays and inefficiency to productivity. And we also have, in fact, some of the things we have seen is also that some manufacturers even have a pile-up of inventory that is unsold, which is speaking to the fact that the Nigerian people have less purchasing power, and therefore they are unable to even buy the basic needs that they require. So you need this concerted effort that is, coordinated and complementary between the monetary authorities, the fiscal authorities, and even the trade, authorities to ensure that we try and take out the part of this, pain that we are going through that I would call self-inflicted. Because some of those things, like the multiple taxation issue that we just spoke about a few minutes ago, is self-inflicted. We can deal with that. If you also look at issues around overregulation, we can deal with that. So there's quite a number of things we can address and therefore begin to see a downward trend in inflation and then be able to improve the standard of living for our people. If you look at cholera today that we are dealing with, it's simply the disease of poverty because people have no access to clean water, sanitation. We even have open defecation in 2024 for millions of our people. And this is the reason why we are saying to our political leaders that we have to prioritize spending on the things that impact on our people the most, doing the greater good for the greater number of people. And that's why the work of our committee is not just focused on tax, it's focused on fiscal reforms, including spending and borrowing.
I want to go back to the National Construction and Household Support Program that I listed out. Because if you look at the federal government, when I talk about federal government now, let's include the monetary authority and the fiscal authority. There seems to be a lot of activity going on. Nigerians are not finding life funny right now. Things are tough. People are on the edge. People are on the brink of a precipice, literally. It's almost like, where are we going from here? And what we hear from the president is, give me time, give us some time. There's still hope in the future. Hope, they say, is not a strategy at the end of the day, but it keeps reassuring and all of that. But we realize that in the midst of all of these movements, all of this effort, we're not seeing the desired impact. Are we missing the bull's eye in all of the efforts being put out? And what is this bull's eye?
Yeah, so, I think everybody will recognize that these are not easy problems to solve. These are problems that we should have dealt with over a decade ago. We wasted time. And because we wasted time, it means that whenever you want to do that reform, it will come with the pain that we're unfortunately having to go through at this time. And then, I know how hard it can be for parents to wake up in the morning and have no idea where the next meal will come from. And then you have your kids staring at you almost hopelessly. It's tough. I think there's no need denying that things are really difficult. But you also have to recognize that, the fact that you want everything to just turn good immediately, we're all very impatient, including myself. You also have to recognize that that's not how things play out. So like we have the fiscal reforms that we've been talking about, there are things that will take a bit of time. You have the monetary authorities that have been trying to do a lot, from raising MPR to issues around, cash reserve ratio, to issues around reforms in the FS sector. But the reality is, inflation is still quite stubborn. So the question is going to be, what else do you need to do? So we know that at this point, we need a lot of the interventions to come from the fiscal side. And like I said before, we need to start addressing the structural issues that we are facing. If you take insecurity, for example, you will not be able to solve that overnight. But you can indeed make some dents in the way it's approached. You can deal with overregulation. There was a session today with PEBEC, which you also reported in your initial news today, about the reforms with various agencies. So, and more broadly, as a human being, you have to keep hope alive. The moment that you have no hope, then there's no, you are not living anymore.
All right.
So I think it's about keeping hope alive and doing the best we can, both from the private sector and the public sector, to get us out of the wood sooner rather than later.
All right, Mr. Oyedele, I must thank you so much. The reason why I had to raise the issue of hope, and which they say is not a strategy, is because Nigerians, I doubt whether they've ever lived in a time where things went up and came down. So anytime any administration makes things to go up, there's that panic button we always push, like, you're going to kill us. So it will be interesting to see how this will taper down. The aspiration is 21% from where we are. Let's see how that happens. The prayer is that it happens, but it looks like a tall order. But I must ask you in closing, 30 seconds, please. The implementation of your reforms that you propose to the president, just to highlight it yet again, when is it taking off? Is it going to be in phases or is it going to be full-blown? And which will come first? 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, the implementation will be in phases because the extent of what we are doing, in fact, includes amending the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So some of them, like I said to you, the withholding tax regime has been signed and is going to be gazetted in a few days. Whereas some of them, like amending the Constitution, would even take more than another 1 year from today. So we have phases, implementation of fiscal policy, documents, different laws, regulations, executive orders. So it's in phases and we are sequencing them. And like I said, we are now at the point where people will start seeing the outcome of those efforts that we have been putting in for about 1 year now.
Mr. Oyedele is the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.